This is about families who want to be sure they can have peace of mind, to know that there won't be a change in a Supreme Court case that would devastate their lives and would unravel their financial arrangements, their family decisions, their adoptions, their visitation rights.
It's U.S. Senator Rob Portman from the state of Ohio talking about the Defense of Marriage Act, the Protect Marriage Act, whatever you want, the same-sex marriage bill, which was something got renewed interest following the SCOTUS decision earlier this year regarding abortion. Rob Portman, by the way, before we move forward and see how some of our Missouri politicos reacted to this, Rob Portman, kind of an interesting story. That's why we like to say we don't backtrack, we don't change our minds, we don't double talk. We evolve on things. Rob Portman evolved on the idea of same-sex marriage back, 2010, 2011, adamantly against it. I'm against same-sex marriage. A man marries a woman. That's the way, in my mind, it's supposed to be. And then one day his son comes in and says, "Hey, Dad, can we talk?" His dad's like, "Sure." And his son says to me, "Dad," he says, "I'm gay." And then Rob Portman evolved.
Like many of us. I think.
And that's a great point. When it affects you, it's a little different. Why? Because we love our kids or we love those people that are close to us. It affects us. And now we kind of start paying attention and we see maybe real life consequences. Now, my perspective on this, by the way, somebody who's been married twice for a total of 3 years. So my marriage is average 1.5 years in length. Stop it, Brian. Marsh, you stop it too, bud. So I don't care who marries what. The idea that we needed to do something to protect interracial marriage.
Well, I would prefer people not marry what, like things.
That's going to be next.
People.
That'll be next.
But I don't care really if you marry a girl or a boy.
I don't either. What I do find is interesting is the way one of our statewide elected officials reacted to one of our U.S. senators, Roy Blunt, in his vote. He voted in favor of this, joined, I think, 11 other Republicans voting in favor of this. Mm-hmm. Jay Ashcroft apparently sent him, actually, I found this on the Twitter. I was on Twitter yesterday.
Wow. It was all over the Twitter. It was hard to miss.
Yeah, and I may not be on there much longer if the White House gets there because they're keeping an eye. They're keeping an eye on Twitter. That's crazy, too.
He's barely on there anyways.
At Rathert Branden. Steph is on there, too.
Stephanie S. Bell.
Yeah, Mr. Brian Houseworth is on there.
I am at Brian on the air.
Producer Hannah is on there.
Yeah, producer_Hannah.
And John Marsh, what's your handle? KWOS News Radio. We are Wake Up Mid-Missouri. We welcome you here. One of our statewide elected office holders coming out like, bam, dropping bombs over Blunt's vote on this. As a matter of fact, ahead of time, apparently sent a letter to Roy Blunt urging him to stop legislation protecting same-sex marriage. One of 12 Republicans to vote in favor. And then apparently in the letter, and I'll show it to you, Jay Ashcroft put in a handwritten note.
He did.
At the end of the letter, please, I urge you to stand up for Missourians.
But there's something very significant about that letter. And the Democrat leader in the Missouri House, Crystal Quaid, says Mr. Ashcroft is out of touch with Missouri voters. But as Ashcroft points out, the thing is, and I touched on this a couple of weeks ago, in 2004, and I was actually a little low. I thought it was 68%. I went back and looked. It's 71% of Missourians voted against same-sex marriage. 71%, 29%. Now, keep in mind, this was in August 2004. Every county voted in favor against same-sex marriage.
Every county.
Every county with the exception of St. Louis City. And the majority of rural counties were 80 to 90% in favor. I mean, I could show you the map. It's very, very. Now it did have a little support in Boone, but it failed here. Bottom line, in all the rural counties, it was between 80 and 90%. But keep in mind that that was in 2004. So much so that Governor Holden at the time was so worried about putting it on the ballot that he wanted it on the August ballot because they did not want that on the November ballot when he or Claire McCaskill, it ended up being McCaskill, would be on the gubernatorial ballot. I don't know how. I'd be interested if that vote were held today, what the percentage would be. This wasn't all that long ago.
It wasn't, but neither. I mean, you think about how fast people's views on marijuana have changed. I don't think that vote would be the same today. And I think, too, you got to, for some people, it's the actual word of marriage that they have an issue with, right? And so that constitutional amendment, I think, defined what is a marriage. And people would say, well, technically, I think marriage is between a man and a woman, but, I'm not going to prevent, two women or two men from having a civil union, right? But I just don't, in my mind, I don't want to call it a marriage. I think that's where some people are at. Ashcroft's letter raised 4 points, and so his second point was that, hey, we did pass this constitutional amendment. It was overwhelmingly approved. But I do think he raised his first point was just that the Respect for Marriage Act significantly alters the balance between state and federal power. And so he does say, hey, look, traditionally, marriage rules and laws were left to the states. It doesn't need to be handled by the federal government. The federal government should stay out of this and let the states do their own thing. And personally, when it comes to marriage, I think government should stay out of it altogether. But I to the extent the government's going to get involved, I do kind of agree with Ashcroft there that it is a state's issue. But as far as, that Missourians overwhelmingly are against gay marriage, I don't know that that's true today. And then he has some, and then his other points, he goes on to talk about, he thinks that it will affect faith-based communities, that the Respect for Marriage Act will, that people of faith might have repercussions based on the law. And then he talks about how it's bad policy because history shows that marriage is between man and woman, and the importance of families and children in marriages and having a stable household.
So why do we do man marries woman? Because that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah, and again, John, that's right. I do remember that. But, to Stephanie's point, Ashcroft is correct. I mean, if he's looking at the numbers, it's just we have to be very clear that we're talking about a 2004 vote. I think in a lot, look at the rural counties even today with the rural lawmakers. A lot of the rural lawmakers are not in favor of gay rights today. So I don't know how the vote would be today. It may be different, but I'd be curious if the same vote was held today, how it would be. The last point I would make is I remember in 1996, there was a state representative right here in Columbia. His name was Tim Harlan, a Democrat. And he called for same-sex marriage. And I did a story on it at the radio station in Jefferson City. And the consultant at our radio station, John, the consultant pulled me aside. The consultant, by the way, was very progressive. Basically, he was very liberal. And he said, why are you doing a story on this? This is not California. This will never pass in Missouri. And at the time, it was, by the way, I don't even know that the bill got a hearing, but I said it's newsworthy. And it was because Tim Harlan felt very strongly about it. The point is, that in 1996 or 97, it was Tim Harlan and a guy named Tim Van Zandt from Kansas City. At the time we reported on that, and John, you reported on it as well, the Democrats were in control of the House, Senate, and the governor. I don't think the bill even got a hearing, but it was just not even something that was going to happen. But I did the story anyway. But that's how much things have changed, and that was not even 30 years ago.
Well, we have people right here in the studio and people listening that made a vote in 2004, and I suspect I don't recall exactly how I voted, but I suspect I probably voted in favor of that. That was the conservative position at the time. I was young, but if you gave the same thing to me today, and I voted again, shall, and I don't remember the exact language, but shall marriage be limited to a man and a woman? I would vote differently today, right? And I think there are probably a lot of people out there who would say the same thing.
Well, I think that's BS. I don't think you were even 18 years old yet in 2004 because you're so young, Stephanie.
Right?
It was, by the way, it was one sentence and very, very simple. It said that to be valid and recognized in the state of marriage shall exist only between a man and a woman.
But I wonder, and of course, Jay Ashcroft, run for governor, Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe. So I think anything people do now, do you see this as, and I have much respect for Jay Ashcroft, is this, hey, I'll do this, and everybody will talk about it, including Wake Up Mid-Missouri on 93.9 The Eagle and 104.5 News Radio 950 KWS. The other thing that I think is interesting regarding the whole marriage thing and stuff, and maybe, John, this is more in our wheelhouse, but I remember when I was at college going to Southeast Missouri State and had the girlfriend Ginger, and yes, it was actually her name, Hannah. We decided we were going to cohabitate. We were going to live together.
In sin.
Exactly. And even so, this was the 80s. And my parents, who were conservative, but you do your thing, you do you, just don't hurt other people. Even my parents were kind of like, you're going to shack up. You're going to shack up with this girl.
We
huh?
always use that in
Right.
college. But Chris and I didn't officially live together until after we were
Officially.
married. Hannah officially lived with her boyfriend.
Yeah, and we got pushback from a couple people.
And is that a thing anymore? Is it, because at least back in the 80s when I was, and I've lived with various women over the years, some of them I was even, and some of them I was even married to them. But you could see it over the years, because then I would remember the next time that I was going to shack up with some chick. And people would, it's like, not a thing. But you got 22-year-old college grad. You got a little pushback.
Yeah, I did a little bit.
Was it family? Was it church? Would you care to venture on that for 20 seconds or no?
I mean, I don't want to go into too many details. It was mostly church.
Mostly church.
Mostly
But
church.
I would, there's some respect there, and I think, I support traditional values. I have a sister who's in her 30s who has a boyfriend, and, I still have the conversation of like, okay, if they come to my house, they're not married.
Oh.
What do
Yes!
what do I do? Do I let them stay in this?
Exactly.
Yeah, and my kids are, and yeah.
I mean, it would be one thing
It's hard because you want to respect their choices, but you also want to set a good example.
I think, there were times where, my boyfriend and I had to sleep in different beds if we were at, his parents' house or whatever, and that's totally fine. I think if my older sibling was saying, now you guys can't sleep in the same room, I'd be like, what the heck?
I'd be like, pow, pow, got two of them for you. Well, because here's the thing you get from kids, and we got to move forward. Mom, who's the guy in the room with the... Oh, that's your auntie's special friend.
I won't say who it is, but yeah, my kids, about somebody that they know, said, she sure had a lot of boyfriends.
Oh!
Austin McKinney, Des making a big run. It's meant for him. Des is stuck in behind. Des into the middle. Pulisic scores! Might have paid the price, but the U.S. takes the lead.
I am a huge soccer fan whenever there's a bunch of people out in the green room watching it on TV, and they're all... Yeah, we're all hanging out here in the green room, and John and I are kind of like, well, I guess everybody else is doing it. We're going to succumb to peer pressure. USA beats Iran. One of the cool things, there was a player on the field afterwards for Iran, and he was crying, and a couple of U.S. players went up and consoled him. Thought it was pretty cool. Welcome into the show. Wake Up Mid-Missouri coming up 6:35. Surplus. Huge. A bulging surplus, I think, is how one news outlet here in Missouri described it. Budget surplus. So what does that mean for you? Tom Kruckmeyer, former chief economist for the Missouri Budget Office, now with the Missouri Budget Project. He's here at 6:35 to break that down for us. And Coach Gary Pinkel, going to the Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame. He joins us 8:10. Make sure you let your friends know, hey, Gary Pinkel's hanging out with the crew there on Wake Up Mid-Missouri. Getting ready for the daily DC Rundown. Prep's underway right now. What are you working on?
Well, Ashcroft wrote that
When you look at Title 42 and they say that they expelled 1 million people, that means we released more than 1 million people into the United States. We did not expel more than 50% of the people that crossed into the United States.
That's National Border Patrol Council President Brandon Judd on Fox talking about that massive invasion that is happening. Not a talking point. It is for real happening at the southern border. We've had at least 25 fentanyl overdose deaths just in Columbia, most of those younger people, too. And that is part of what's getting us into today's Daily D.C. Rundown with Stephanie Bell.
Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments on state and federal immigration policy. If you recall, Mayorkas issued some guidelines and said, hey, we don't have resources to fully enforce the deportation policy, so we're going to prioritize these categories of people. Texas and Louisiana, I think it was Louisiana, but Texas definitely stepped up and said, hey, not okay. The law says here are the categories of people that are an issue. You can't pick and choose. You have to enforce it against everybody. And so it went to the Supreme Court. There's a couple things at issue. I guess the federal government is arguing that the states don't have standing. They're like, you're not harmed by this policy. And they're like, we have to pay for these people. And so that's one of the issues. And then, can the lower court issue a nationwide injunction that basically prohibits the Biden administration from enforcing their policy? And then, what does the law actually say? Is the policy contrary to existing federal law? So.
And I like that the idea of standing, and we had a great, healthy conversation about this, I think, last week as it relates to the college loan, student loan debt forgiveness thing. Some lawsuits say, well, you don't have any standing. I say, bull. My taxpayers' dollars are going for that. I have standing.
There's no such thing as taxpayer standing generally, but anyway, we'll have that conversation another day. So Ashcroft was writing a letter to Roy Blunt yesterday. I guess reporters were asking Roy Blunt what he thought about Trump, and he said something to the effect of, I'm tired of always getting asked about Trump, but he did comment on this dinner that Trump had with a white nationalist and a rapper who we know. And Roy Blunt said, I wouldn't want to have dinner with either one of those guys, or I wouldn't want to meet with either one of those guys, which I thought was like, why are you asking me this? And yeah, I wouldn't have dinner with those. Apparently, there are a lot of people on Trump's team who are saying the same thing. Apparently, there are protocols about who he can have dinner with and not going forward.
I think Blunt said, certainly there's something else you can ask me about.
Right, something like that.
We're going to ask this guy, Tom Kruckmeyer, former chief economist for the Missouri Budget Office. We have a huge, bulging budget surplus. So what does that mean for you? The answer is coming up 5 minutes from now on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Then came a White House proposal for a $28 billion tax cut to be matched by a $28 billion cut in the proposed spending. Well, my question then and my question now is, if there was $28 billion in the new budget that could be cut, what was it doing there in the first place?
Obviously, a lot of years ago, widely regarded as one of the greatest presidents of all time, Ronald Reagan. You know, I think we get so heady in this stuff, the budget and this money and this line item thing and this thing and that thing and what about this and that. And sometimes we simplify it. Well, if we have this much in the first, what were we doing with that money? If we feel
going into debt, taking the money from the federal government, that's what Missouri's doing right now. I mean, the national debt is higher than it's ever been, and the federal government's just doling it out to locals and states that they don't even know what to do with it.
So I wanted to bring in somebody to talk about our state budget. Rudy Keller, Missouri Independent, uses the headline, Missouri state budget is bulging with $6 billion in surplus cash. I want to bring in somebody who kind of knows a thing or two about this. Tom Kruckmeyer, former chief economist for the Missouri Budget Office, and was like the lead dude at the Missouri Budget Project, and he kept trying. Tom, I feel like every time you keep trying to get away from that stuff, everybody kind of begs and pleads you to, well, just stay on in an advisory role. Just stay and do a little bit. Am I accurate in that assessment?
Yeah, basically. It's kind of like the Godfather Part 3. You know, Michael's trying to get out, and they keep pulling him back in. But this is what I do, and I'm happy to talk about it and hopefully share my many years of experience in working on this topic.
All right, so I like that. We've got former chief economist for the Missouri Budget Office, now with the Missouri Budget Project, comparing himself to a mafioso character from one of the greatest movies of all time.
Exactly, pretty much how it works. You're right.
Tom Kruckmeyer here on Wake Up Mid-Missouri this morning. Branden Rathert, Stephanie Bell, John Marsh, Brian Hausworth, producer Hannah. So let's start with this. Number one, and we can get into the nuts and bolts, but I'm thinking somebody listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri, 6:38 a.m. We have a lot of new, younger listeners. We have an incredible amount of regretful Biden voters checking out this show, checking out talk radio, like, what does all this mean to me? Can you explain in layman's terms a budget surplus in the state of Missouri? Somebody driving to work right now, what is that going to mean for that person?
Well, the fact that the state budget's actually in darn good shape, I think most people should be pretty happy about that, because we all depend on state government services that need and have to be done, and the fact that the state's in good fiscal shape, has enough money to fulfill everything in the budget, at least for a while, and there's tax cuts are in place now and will be coming. So I think the people ought to be pretty happy about this. I can assure you, over the years being on shows like this, many was the day when I came on talking about budget shortfalls, budget difficulties, all kinds of bad things. This is a refreshingly new experience to talk about good economic and budget times, and hopefully they'll continue. I guess that's the big question that we can, of course, discuss if you care to.
So, what is Missouri unique among other states in that our budget is doing so well? And if so, can you pinpoint the reasoning? I mean, a lot of people would pinpoint the tax reduction, income tax reduction, as perhaps giving us a healthier economy. Do you agree with that?
Well, Missouri is pretty much like all other states in the fact that we have all states have benefited from the copious amount of federal monies that became available because of the COVID problem there. In March of 2020, President Trump signed the CARES Act. About a year later, President Biden signed the American Recovery Plan, both of which provided substantial monies to state governments, among many other things. So Missouri is certainly not unique. Now, our economy is doing very well now, and the federal stimulus is certainly a significant part of that. Plus, let me also mention that maybe gets a little lost in the weeds is the Federal Reserve has increased the money supply very substantially over the last roughly 3 years. It's increased about 40% in a little under 3 years. So there's been a lot of factors at work here, but the bottom line is the state's in good fiscal shape, and I would expect that other states who receive similar federal aid are also in good budget condition.
All right, our guest, Tom Kruckmeyer, former chief economist for the Missouri Budget Office, now with the Missouri Budget Project. He's hanging out with us this morning talking about Missouri's massive budget surplus on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Well, the simple answer is probably not, because the federal aid is probably going to start to, well, it has. In fact, the federal budget deficit, which of course was ballooned in FY 20 and 21, is now down or been reduced by about 50% in the federal fiscal year that just ended. And given the strength of the economy, I would expect that the federal aid and things that are of that nature will begin to diminish. And furthermore, we're seeing interest rates are creeping up a bit. So I think caution is certainly in order. And you, of course, referred to the article that Rudy Keller wrote, which I thought was a very good look at that. And seems budget expert extraordinaire Jim Moody, my former boss, is also looking at things tapering off a bit. But let me say this about that. The growth of state revenues in the last fiscal year 22, was off the map good. And I've been following this for 40 years. And actual state general revenue grew by about 23%. And previous to the federal stimulus monies coming in as a function of the COVID crisis, had been growing, 2 or 3%. Revenue growth in Missouri had been pretty mediocre. So my point is that this is pretty unsustainable, even though there's certainly some inflation is contributing to that. But there's a lot of moving parts, but I wouldn't expect to see revenue growth anywhere near that going forward. Although it's again been pretty good so far in the current fiscal year, we're still up about 15% through about the first 5 months. So things are still pretty good, but this is probably not going to continue forever.
Now, with the money we do have now, obviously we can stereotype Democrats. They want these things. Republicans want these things. Peter Meredith, Democrat. Representative Peter Meredith, St. Louis, says we need to, the first priority, he said, should be state agencies at or near crisis. Other people say we need it for this, we need it for teachers, we need it for state employees. And I know when you have that much money, I'm guessing if you were to put your list, what is number one on the list? If you care to offer an opinion, Tom, what would be number 1 and 2 on your list?
Well, my personal list is I'd be happy to learn that they had enough snowplow drivers. I don't see why that should be a big problem myself, because eventually it's going to snow and all that kind of thing. But no, I'm not joking about that. Well, I think, as Representative Meredith points out, there's still a lot of shortfalls in the state budget. Debatable and arguably are shortfalls in terms of school funding and teacher pay and a number of social services areas. And another area that's been a chronic problem, of course, is having adequate staffing in prisons and mental health institutions has been a problem for a long time. And Missouri state government employees have been, over the years that I've been studying this, either the lowest or very next to the lowest paid in the nation. And that has been redressed to some extent. The current budget has a 5.5% raise, I believe, for average state employees, and that's all good because you have to have adequate staffing and be able to attract and retain competent employees. So I think getting the state worker pay up, addressing specific areas in social services and education would all be benefit the common good and still leave money for a number of other things. As you may know, or do know, I'm sure, major tax cut scheduled to begin start of the year. Another thing, though, that's not gotten as much talk about, the current year we're in, 22, the state is having an income tax rate cut. The rate last year was 5.4% of the top rate. This year it's 5.3%. So things are in place to reduce revenues, whether or not that's going to be, too much, not enough, or just right. Smarter people than me are going to have to figure that out, but I'm certainly happy to offer an opinion.
So people like you, let's talk. I assume this year in the legislature there'll be renewed calls to return some of the surplus to the people in one way or another. People like you or people in the Mo Budget Project, what would their stance be? Would they just say, whoa, 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 hold your horses?
Yeah, pretty much. Because I'll take advantage of the fact that I'm old and I've been through this over the years quite a bit, and give you a quick example here. Back in fiscal year 2008, state general revenue was a tick over $8 billion, and then, of course, the Great Recession hit. Revenues declined sharply over the next 2 years, not even adjusting for inflation. And recovery began by fiscal year 2011. But state revenues in 2014 were almost identical to what they were in 2008. So, and then, of course, there would be, natural population growth, inflation, that kind of thing. So the state budget was under a lot of strain, and I'm not necessarily saying that's going to happen again, but as I mentioned a moment ago, with revenues last year growing 23%, that's not going to continue, and the budget planners, I'm sure they are, and they need to be aware of this and not be too gung-ho on reducing revenues, because we're not going to see this kind of revenue growth off into the future in all likelihood.
All right, former chief economist for the Missouri Budget Office, now with the Missouri Budget Project. By the way, former chief economist for a lot of years, Tom Kruckmeyer. I think the biggest takeaway that I'm hearing right now is somebody heading to work this morning, this massive budget surplus that we have right now, and at least foreseeable quick future, something we should be feeling good about. Tom, we appreciate you joining us this morning here on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. Enjoy talking with you.
Well, thank you, man. Coming up, if you are on social media, whether it be the TikTok,
There's reports that Apple is not allowing the protesters to use this airdrop function where they're trying to communicate. That obviously is providing aid and comfort to the CCP. And then when you also hear reports that Apple is threatening to remove Twitter from the App Store because Elon Musk is actually opening it up for free speech and is restoring a lot of accounts that were unfairly and illegitimately suspended for putting out accurate information about COVID.
All right, that's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, likely presidential contender. We just don't know if it's going to be 2024, 28, 32. I don't know.
Oh, I think we know.
True story. So Apple, they're talking about potentially removing the app for Twitter from the iStore. Meanwhile, they're helping the Chinese government by disallowing this airdrop feature that I understand a little bit.
I think airdrop should be disallowed for everybody, not just in China, really, because
airdrop, if you have an iPhone, which I don't have, I'm an old white dude, I got the Droid, I'm on the Droid platform, but airdrop, like if you could drop, like if you're taking a photo and you send it to a text via somebody, airdrop, like you could drop it to anybody who has a smartphone around, has an iPhone around you.
If they have like their airdrop open.
Okay.
But yeah.
Are kids carrying these smartphones into schools, by the way, these iPhones?
Yes.
Is this stuff happening in schools?
Yes.
Are they getting inappropriate airdrops? Really? Wow. Crazy. But let's help the Chinese government.
That's ridiculous.
Wow. And then, so obviously a lot of talk about big tech right now. Mark Zuckerberg, who came to mid-Missouri a couple of years ago, toured the Stamp Brothers egg farm outside of the Centralia area. Mark Zuckerberg, there is a video of him out there, shows he's pushing for tech regulation acts to be passed by Democrats.
Over the past 5 years, Congress has held over 30 hearings designed to hold big tech accountable. Sometimes you land a punch.
Do you see a potential problem here with a complete lack of fact-checking on political advertisements?
Well, Congresswoman, I think lying is bad for
So you won't take them
their
down.
character for themselves.
So you won't take, you may flag that it's wrong, but you won't take it down.
Most of the time, felt like playing patty cake.
So that's video of, you watch the video, it's Mark Zuckerberg and kind of pushing, except
it's not Mark Zuckerberg.
It's not Mark Zuckerberg. It is a deep fake. And then it gets better. And now it gets really good. So we know it's the progressives because they think anything they disagree with, that's false information. What do you mean? The border is secure. What are you talking about? And so you go onto Twitter and you put the border is not secure. Joe Biden might sentence you to death or get Nina Jankowicz on you. The group that put this out, it's a liberal advocacy group. They're the ones that putting out this fake crap. The group is called Demand Progress. They're the ones that release this deepfake video that purports to show Mark Zuckerberg pushing for tech regulation acts to be passed by Democrats in the final year or the final weeks that they have control in the House, at the very least. Christy, no. You think she'll run for president? Maybe.
She'd be a good VP pick, I think.
She would. She has banned. She's banned TikTok within government offices in the state of South Dakota because it's owned by China. It's a Chinese social media platform, TikTok, and she says people are not going to be allowed to use that on any state employee phones. What else? Did we miss any? Is Getter still a thing, or is it Parler?
There's a new one. It's called Mastodon.
And what is that? Is it like a Facebook? Is it like?
It's more like Twitter. But apparently you have to kind of like join clubs. It's decentralized. So you have to pick whether you're going to go on like journalist Mastodon or food and wine Mastodon or whatever. You can still interact with everybody, but you kind of have like a homeroom, is my understanding.
I always wonder, where do people find time to spend that much time on social media? That's always my question. 51-year-old dude who's not a big fan of social media. That's the question I always ask. We do appreciate you hanging out with us here on Wake Up Mid-Missouri this morning. Coming up, 8:10, Coach Gary Pinkel. He's going into the Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame, I think like 6 days from now. But first, wants to come hang out with John Marsh and Stephanie Bell, who's decked out in black and gold. You can see for yourself. Go to our YouTube channel where you can watch the show. By the way, see what happens behind the scenes. See what happens during the commercial breaks. Wake Up Mid-Missouri on YouTube. Staff decked out in the black and yellow. Coach Gary Pinkel here at 8:10 this morning. on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.